Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
Our next guest is a personal favorite of mine. Dave Carter is the Executive Director of the National Bison Association. When I first covered the story about bison, they were in danger of extinction. Today, they are a healthy, growing food source. Dave, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm going to turn it right over to Ann.
Dave, welcome to the program. I was reading about your background. You're not only Executive Director of the Bison Association, but you're Director of Sourcing for Halo, purely for pets. You have a consulting business, Crystal Springs Consulting, and are a member of the USDA Agricultural Trade Advisory Committee on animal products. Tell us a bit about all the work that you do.
Well, I've spent about 40 years in agriculture. Started off working for one of the general farm organizations and was working for them when we went through what we call the farm crisis in the 1980s. And that was a time when I saw agriculture really start to take two paths. As we came out of the farm crisis, there were some folks that said, okay, I'm going to be a commodity producer. I'm going to produce generic commodities. I'm going to grow number 2 yellow corn, whatever. And in order to do that, I'm going to use, my margins are going to be razor thin, and so I'm going to have the most land, and I'm going to have the biggest equipment and use the most chemicals. And, when genetic engineering came along, I'm going to start using the GMOs. And there were another group of producers that said, that's not me. I'm not a commodity producer. I'm a farmer. I produce food. I want to take care of the land. And that's where we really start to see the growth of the organic agriculture and the organic industry. We start to see the rise of natural meat, of meat grown without antibiotics and hormones. And that's really where we started to see the growth of the bison business. And so that was my passion. I started working with producers who were trying to carve out that new path. I call it a new path, but it's really a path of taking traditional agriculture and keeping it viable. And so as my career has developed, I kind of worked with producers in all of those areas. But most of my time is spent with the Bison Association, working with bison producers and in restoring this magnificent animal to its natural ecosystem. And the great thing about our effort to restore bison to North America is that the American public, our customers, I hate to call them consumers, but our customers are our partners in restoring bison, because the more that they make a choice to add bison to their diet, the more incentive there is for farmers and Native Americans and others to bring back this animal to its historic landscape.
Dave, thank you for that. And it's a wonderful story in terms of your having really brought back the bison industry. The National Bison Association was formed from both the American Buffalo and the National Buffalo Association. Talk about the name change and why bison is a more accurate representation of the animal found in North America.
You bet. When the first commercial business started to emerge in the late 60s and the 70s, there were these two associations. And in the 90s, they got together and formed the National Bison Association. And I get the question a lot of, is it bison or is it buffalo? And my short answer is, I don't care what you call it, just enjoy it. Technically, the name is bison. The scientific name is bison. And so the animal is truly a bison. Buffalo technically refers to water buffalo, but we've been calling these animals buffalo for 400 years in this country, and so that's a terminology that many people use. The only thing now where we're really starting to drive the message more toward bison is we're finding that there are folks in pet food and in human food that are promoting their products, and the customers think that it is bison, but it's actually buffalo. and they're using water buffalo. And so we're actually working with the FDA and USDA and with the folks that control pet food regulations to try and make sure that, if they're using water buffalo in a product, we don't care if they do. Just make sure that your customers understand that it's water buffalo and not what they think is American bison.
Right. And the water buffalo is more of an African animal, is it not?
Absolutely, yeah. It's not indigenous to this part of the world. The animal that's part of this environment and is native to this part of the world is the American bison. Or if you live up in North Dakota or Canada, you call it bison. You put a Z in there a little bit, but it's all the same animal.
Awesome. You have, I think I read you have 1,100 members in all 50 states and 10 foreign countries. Describe a bit about the membership. How many are actually the ranchers versus, I think you also have processors and marketers and enthusiasts that are part of the association.
You bet. We have some folks that just love bison that are part of the association and marketers as well. But our membership is so incredibly diverse. I was giving my report to our annual conference a few years back, and I looked out in the audience, and sitting there was Ted Turner, who's the largest owner of bison in the world. Ted has got 15 ranches with over 50,000 head of bison on them, and literally sitting next to him was a young couple from southeastern Colorado that had maybe 30 head of bison, and they sell buffalo burgers out of a food truck. And I thought to myself, those are the bookends of folks that are involved in this business, and they're both so important. Ted has done a wonderful job. He's partners with George McCarroll in a chain of restaurants called Ted's Montana Grill, and they've introduced a lot of folks to bison that have gone in there and tried it as a novelty and learned that it's a wonderful meat and have started to buy more of it. But that young couple that was sitting next to him, they're there at a farmer's market or at a craft fair, and they're handing out samples on a toothpick. And as people take that first taste of bison, they go, wow, this is delicious. Where can I find some more? So we have so many people that are playing a role in so many ways, large and small. Some are commercial marketers. Some are out there at the farmers markets, on Saturdays. All of them are playing an important role.
Wonderful. You also have government agencies involved. How do you work with them, and what might be some of the key areas of focus with the government agencies?
Well, we've been very fortunate through the years of, regardless of administrations, of having a very good working relationships, particularly with the folks at USDA. We are such a small business when you think about the scope of agriculture, and we're always going to be a niche. When I give the comparison is that last year we processed about 60,000 head of bison for the food marketplace for the whole year. And that's what the beef industry does before noon on an average day. They do about 125,000 head a day. So when you think about it, when you've got these federal agencies and where they are probably going to be, spending their attention and their resources, you've got the major commodities out there, beef, dairy, pork, etc. But yet we have been able to develop a strong relationship with, the USDA for areas of getting resources to help us get new producers into the business, which is a real need right now because the demand has outstripped our supply. So we need young and beginning ranchers in, and the USDA is working with us on that. We've got a grant that we're administering to help our producers that are involved in farmers markets and agritourism and other types of direct marketing. And USDA is also helping us to open up some of the markets for bison in Europe and Korea and Japan. And so, what we've been able to do is not because we're a big association with lots of clout and lots of financial resources, but we've been able to sit down and develop a personal relationship with some of these policymakers and get them on the team to help us out.
So, I thought it was fascinating that you talked about you need more people sort of in the business of raising bison. How are the ways in which you if you were to tell someone, okay, they're really interested in having a ranch, having a bison ranch, what would be the first couple of things they really would need to do?
Well, first of all, they need to log on to our website, which is bisoncentral.com. And we've got a ton of resources there for people just to learn about bison. Just if you're curious about how fast the animal can run or how long does it live, we've got those kind of things. But if you're really interested in taking a look at it as a potential opportunity, we have the first thing to do would be to get a hold of our Bison Producers Handbook. And this has been out, just about a year and a half. And it's about a 300-page book, but it was put together with input from about 25 different folks that have got expertise in everything from buying your first animal to selling the meat. We have DVDs on there that have some things on how to handle the bison. But the main thing that we'll do is if somebody will contact us, we will connect them with someone that's in the business. And as you mentioned before, we're pretty much across the country with folks in all 50 states. And so what we like to do is connect prospective producers with somebody that's been around the business and just to talk to them. One of the things that I've found that's so great about the bison business is that the folks that have been involved, even if they've been involved for 30 or 40 years, they love to help newcomers get started. We know that when we bring new people into the business, they're not going to be competing against us in the marketplace. They're going to be working with us as we all help to build the marketplace for bison. And so it's a really welcoming community, and we love to have newcomers join us.
That's really fantastic. I was reading an article, and I think you wrote a blog that regards the question of genetically pure bison. And I know the association has a point of view on this. Could you tell our audience a little bit about what it means today and what maybe it may have meant in the past to save the bison herd?
You bet. No, and I'm glad you asked that question, because every once in a while there'll come up this issue about genetically pure bison. And when people usually do say that, they say, well, yes, here's this group of genetically pure bison, and unlike most bison that's been bred with cattle and being sold for meat. Well, when people hear that, their thought is, oh, you mean those ranchers are out there actively crossbreeding bison with cattle? And that's not the case. In fact, our code of ethics prohibit crossbreeding of bison with any other species. And we have a lot of our ranchers that are out there actually doing active DNA testing to test their animals and to weed out any bison that show any evidence of crossbreeding. What happened, and the reason that this is an issue, is that 130 years ago, bison teetered on the brink of extinction. By the best estimates, there were, in about 1885, there were probably about 750 bison left in the world. And thanks to a handful of ranchers in the West and the Bronx Zoo in the East, but primarily these ranchers in the West, they gathered up the remnants of the herds and saved bison from extinction. But at that time, there had just been some really incredible blizzards across the Great Plains, and these ranchers noticed, well, gosh, my cattle, they died in the blizzard, but these bison, they weathered it. I wonder if I could crossbreed these bison with the cattle and create a winter hardy, hybrid. And so they experimented with that, and the experiments failed. They found out that they ended up with sterile bulls, and the females had calving problems and bad attitudes, and so they quit doing it. But as a result of that, there were some cattle genetics that were introduced into bison. And so now, there are some bison out there that have what we call these legacy genetics in them. But according to the geneticist, it's generally less than 1.5% of their genetic makeup. So that this isn't anything that ranchers are doing now. And as I mentioned before, a lot of ranchers are doing some DNA testing and culling out those animals that show any significant cattle genetics. We know that these animals, bison, they evolved as a part of this environment. And when you think about it, I always say that the whole ecosystem of about 40% of North America bears the hoof print of the bison, because the species of grass that grow out there naturally evolved with bison. The predators, the birds, even the contours of the land were all shaped by the bison. And so what we've found is that those animals that haven't been tinkered with, they really interact best with the environment. They digest the grasses. They grow best on the grasses that grow out there. And so we're committed to making sure that we keep bison and don't tinker with them to try and make them something else.
Yeah, I really appreciate your creating that clarity, because I think people hear genetically and then it's like, people freak out a little bit and they need to really understand that history. And I really appreciate you telling us that story.
Well, and a few years back, there was a movement towards beefalo back in the 70s and the like, and that's a specific breed that's a 3/8, 5/8 cross, and I'll let the beefalo folks speak for themselves, but from our standpoint, we think that Mother Nature did a pretty incredible job of designing this animal over thousands of years. And the best thing that we can do is not mess it up.
Most definitely. So on the consumer side, from an educational point of view, what is most important for consumers to know about bison and bison meat?
Well, there's three things that we want our customers to understand. Is that, first of all, it's an incredibly healthy meat. It's low in fat, it's high in protein, it's high in iron. It's been recommended as one of the foods that women ought to eat because of its iron content. It's easily digestible, so it's a great healthy meat. Second thing is it truly is a sustainable natural meat. In fact, it's illegal to use growth hormones in bison. And we're just happy as heck about that. So we love the fact that it's illegal to use growth hormones in bison. Our protocols are not to use antibiotics for growth purposes. But I always tell people, when you think about sustainable agriculture, what could be more sustainable than the animal that's been part of this ecosystem for thousands of years? So the health is important. The natural sustainable is important. But the third thing that people will discover when they try bison is it's an incredibly delicious meat. It tastes similar to beef. It's just a little bit sweeter. It's not gamey, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to cook with it. It cooks similar to beef, but because it's lower in fat, it cooks quicker. So you want to make sure it doesn't get away from you, and you don't really want to cook it much past medium, because it doesn't have that fat content. If you go to medium well or well done, it will get tough. And you really want that bison to be nice and juicy and flavorful.
Wonderful. Talking about cooking it, have you gotten chefs involved in how best to prepare bison? And if so, how?
Oh, yes. We've gotten a lot of chefs involved. Everybody from Bruce Adele's out in California to lots of local chefs around. And, they've really helped introduce the public to a lot of different types of bison. And what we love is that chefs today are really focusing on what they call nose-to-tail cooking. And, one of the things when I first came into the business about 16 years ago, and we were struggling. I mean, the bison business was in the tank then. And what was happening at that point were a few restaurants were putting some tenderloins or some New York strips or ribeyes on the menu, but there were freezers filling up with everything else. And from a rancher's perspective, unless you're selling that whole animal, you either got to make $1 gazillion off the tenderloins, or you've got to be able to sell the whole animal and spread your cost across that. And so what we're seeing now in so many restaurants is it's not just the tenderloins and the New York strips. We're seeing bison short ribs. We're seeing bison fajitas, ossobuco, bison brisket, and, as well as buffalo burgers or bison burgers on menus all across the country. And so as those chefs have explored new ways of preparing bison, it's been very helpful. The thing that I emphasize, because this is where I'm at, is I'm not a professional chef. I cook up a bison burger. I take my ground bison and I put a little bit of seasoning salt on it and a little bit of olive oil on it, and I put it in the skillet and cook it up or on the grill, and I've got a great bison burger. Or my favorite thing is to take a chuck roast, a bison chuck roast, and I'll put it in the slow cooker in the morning, and I'll put a little bit of some chopped tomatoes and red wine on it because that acid helps break up that meat. And then I'll put in some vegetables, my carrots and potatoes and celery and onions, whatnot. And I put that in before I go to work in the morning. And when I come home at night, the only thing better than the aroma in the kitchen is the taste of the meat when I take it out of that slow cooker.
So if only you lived closer, Don and I would be at your house tonight for that dinner.
I was just thinking that, Ann.
Oh my God, I'm salivating here. The association itself also has 2 conferences a year. What are some of the critical components for a producer to attend those conferences?
Well, even though we're dealing with an animal that's been around for thousands of years, we are still a relatively new business. And, even the people, as I mentioned before, that have been in the business 30 years or so, they probably didn't grow up on a place where mom and dad were raising business. So we're learning stuff every day. I always like to say the animal teaches us something new every day. And so when we get together, that's a big part of our conference, is that, as the bison business began to emerge years ago, it was a lot of cattle producers that were coming in, and they were bringing in their knowledge of how to raise cattle, and some of that applies, but a lot of it doesn't. And so through the years, we've kind of peeled back those type of things of handling these animals just like cattle, and how do we handle them and take care of them as bison. And so we spend a lot of time with the learning. We have, as I mentioned before, a lot of new folks coming in at our winter conference this year. We always do our winter conference in Denver in January. Probably 20% of our attendees this year were first-timers that were just getting involved in the business. So we want to make sure they get off to a good start. Of course, we eat lots of good bison, and we have a lot of fun and celebrate. Our summer conference this year is going to be in Kansas City at the end of June, so we kind of moved that one around. But one of the things about these conferences that's so important is that because we're such a small business, we rely on each other. You can't go, if you're a bison producer, you may be the only person for miles around raising bison. So your local banker is probably not as familiar with bison. Your feed store may not be as familiar with the products that you need for bison. The sale barn doesn't handle bison. And so what we've found is that because we don't have those outside resources to rely on, we rely on each other. And those relationships that we develop at these conferences are so important throughout the year.
Dave, I was curious about, because you have such an important perspective on how the bison is raised, not allowing for any growth hormones and all that. How do you keep that in check with the individual ranchers, or are you just an honor system, or does the USDA get involved in that piece of it? I'm just curious. How do you make sure that all the ranchers are sort of doing the right thing?
Well, we recognize that we have a very good thing going right now. Bison prices right now are very profitable. Ranchers are making a good living. When you take a look at most of the rest of agriculture, they're struggling right now, and we don't wish ill on our neighbors in the cattle business or row crop or whatever. But USDA just announced their forecast for the coming year, and it's pretty dismal when it comes to conventional agriculture. And we know that we are strong and we're stable and we're growing. And one of the reasons the main reason that's happening is that we've got a good, strong relationship with our customers. They know that we're doing our best to put a good product out there, and as long as they continue to trust us, our market will grow. We're also very fortunate that some of our major commercial markets are in the natural food sector. Places like Whole Foods and Sprouts and Earth Fair and those type of markets, which are very diligent on making sure that the products that go into their outlets that are labeled as certain things live up to that. And so not only do our processors get audited, or inspected by USDA, but we have a whole series of outside auditors that come in and test the product and test the traceability to make sure that we're living up to what we're doing. The other thing that we find is educating our members is, again, it gets back to that old adage that I say, if Mother Nature did such a great job of developing this animal, why do we want to mess it up? And so when we talk to our producers, it's what we call the Bison advantage, is that, in the beef industry, you're dehorning the animals, you're branding them, you're castrating them, you're doing all of these things to them, and during calving season, you're out there pulling calves because we've bred beef animals bigger than Mother Nature intended mom to be able to deliver a calf. Well, in the bison business, we don't castrate them, we don't dehorn them, we don't brand them, we don't use artificial insemination. We let Mother Nature take care of all of that. And when calving season comes around, that's a good time to grab your fishing pole and go fishing, because mom doesn't want you anywhere around her when she's delivering a calf. And so, that's part of our education, is that if we take care of business and stay true to the protocols of nature, not only do we develop a high quality tasting, healthy, naturally produced meat, we also have a better lifestyle. We don't have to be out there during calving season. We don't have to be out there after blizzards hauling feed. These animals take care of themselves. So let's make it easier on the animals and make it easier on us and do the right thing.
That's really fantastic, and it's such a great message. I probably have time for one more question, and though I have lots of questions I'd love to ask you, Dave, is what lies ahead for the future of the association and for the Bison in your mind?
Well, we announced last year a major campaign that we're calling Bison 1 Million, and it is a dedicated effort to restore 1 million bison to North America. I mentioned earlier that in 1885 there were probably 750 animals left alive. We're now at the point that we have 400,000 bison in North America. But we know if we're going to move toward 1 million, that it's going to take all of us. It's not just bison ranchers. We work very closely with the tribal community, and particularly through the Intertribal Buffalo Council. And how are tribal nations bringing back more bison to tribal lands? We work with the conservation community, folks like the Nature Conservancy and Wildlife Conservation Society, on what are some public lands that are appropriate to have for bison. So, we have this dedicated effort to bring more bison back, but it's not just ranchers, it's just not the tribal nations, and it's not just the conservation community. The American public and our customers are a key partner in all of that. So another thing that we launched in concert with Bison 1 Million is, this is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but there's Meatless Mondays out there and there's Taco Tuesdays. Well, since Wednesdays are Hump Day, we figured that it's only appropriate that they should be known as Bison Hump Day. And so we have a campaign out there with the public to get them to start to incorporate bison into their diet on Wednesdays on Bison Hump Day. And we're having a lot of fun with that.
That's really fantastic. Dave, I so much appreciate your being on the show today. And Don, I'm going to turn it over to you so we be sure that we can promote the association and Don's website.
Right. Dave, tell us your website again and how people can reach you.
You can reach us. It's bisoncentral.com. So just go on bisoncentral, all one word, .com. We also have a Facebook page, so you can go on, and the National Bison Association, we're on Facebook. We'd love to have folks connect with us and answer their questions. And if they're interested in being a part of the business, we'd love to help them get started.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a really interesting half hour. Thank you.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book, I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
You know, Ann, our next guest is someone you're very familiar with. He is Tim Metzger of Stonewall Kitchen's Tillen Farms. Well, all I'm going to say is welcome to the program, Tim, and turn it over to Ann.
Thanks, Don. Hi, Tim. Great to have you on the show.
Good morning, Ann.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about your early career. You were VP for sales for pasta and cheese, and you were head of sales and marketing for the Gilway Company. Tell us a little bit about your history before you came to purchase Tillen Farms.
Well, thank you very much, Ann, first off, for having me on the program. My history is a bit checkered in terms of traditional backgrounds for people who are in the position that I'm in, but I did grow up in very much of an entrepreneurial background. My dad and my grandfather, Juan and Joe Metzger, actually were the co-founders of the Dan and Yogurt Company back in 1941, where they brought the recipe in from Barcelona, Spain, to the United States and started that company. So I grew up in somewhat of an entrepreneurial world, not fully realizing that what I thought was a little bit of an embarrassment early on in my life wound up being actually pretty cool when I realized in college that the Dan and Yogurt driver was dropping samples off to my dorm. What a unique business my father actually and grandfather were involved with. I went to school, graduated from college, decided I did not want to become an accountant, and went ahead and wound up working for Procter & Gamble for a couple of years, which was one of the great training grounds you could imagine for someone who wasn't sure what they were doing, but who wanted to work with a great company, with a great organization, who had a very specific agenda in mind. And working for P&G gave me a certain training level and certain discipline that I still carry to this day. I did wind up working with my dad for a number of years at Dannon while going back to school, getting my MBA at night at NYU, and that was a fabulous experience because it really gave me a chance to work with one of the true visionaries of the at that time specialty food world. I realized, however, that I wanted to do something on my own. Wound up working with a small little pasta company in New York called Pasta and Cheese, which was at that time had a number of local retail stores, and we started a wholesale division. The brand today is known as Buitoni. In a short 3-year period of time, the sales ran up to the point where the company went public in the early 80s, purchased by Contadina, by Carnation 3 years later. And I realized that watching a product go from a class to mass was something that I really hoped I'd have an opportunity to do myself at one point. It was a magnificent journey, and ultimately wound up working with a number of specialty food importers, and in early 2002 had an opportunity to start my own business, which was something that perhaps started a little later for me than other entrepreneurs in this business, in this industry. But I must say the last 15 years have been the most fun I could have ever imagined.
You know, you purchased Tillen Farms in 2002, if I read it correctly, from Vincor, Canadian's largest wine distributor, after they had bought the Hogue Cellars. The brand was originally under Hogue Farms. Talk
That's
about
correct.
the name change to Tillen Farms.
Yeah, the company I worked with, the winery I worked with, the Hogue Cellars, I had been working with them for a number of years before I actually was an importer of specialty foods, had taken the product in as a national sales agent. And in 2002, when the winery was sold, they gave me an opportunity to buy the brand. At the time, the winery thought the brand was basically a liability because they didn't want to be in the glass business. So I actually offered to buy the brand for $1 and agreed to buy all the inventory for the full value of the inventory over the time that I needed to sell it. So I basically bought the inventory on consignment. So it gave me a breathing room, a chance to go into my own business. And Hogue Farms at the time had a line of several different pickled vegetables, all from the Yakima Valley, one of the great growing regions in the world for fruits and vegetables. And we started with a very simple premise, making a superior quality product that used a different processing technique for most of the picklers, where we didn't cook the product in the jar. Rather, we blanched and shocked the product so it stood up in a cocktail. And that gave us kind of a leg up on a lot of competitors because we could actually sell through multiple distribution channels, which really became kind of our go-to market strategy, where we weren't reliant upon just supermarket trade for our business, but we in fact could go through a variety of different distribution channels to build sales. And that's something which we started early on in the cycle. I was given a 2-year licensing agreement for the name Hogue Farms, and had to change the name. And my wonderful packaging designer at the time, on the back of a napkin, after going through months of thinking about with friends and having cocktail parties about trying to find a better name, realizing picking a good name is very, very difficult. And in about 30 seconds, my old friend Betty Slater said, "Tim, your first name is T.I., your daughter's name Jill with a J-I-L-L, and your wife's name Helen." She took the first two initials of my name, T.I., added my daughter's last two initials, L.L., my wife's last name, 2 initials as well, and came with Tillen Farms. And Tillen Farms can't be mispronounced, 2-syllable word, like till in the soil. It seemed to fit, it seemed to work, and it's been a great brand ever since, from 2004.
I love that story. So thank you for sharing it. You know, your products are fantastic. I have had them. You know, the asparagus, everything is so crisp. You know, it's not a pickled product where it's limp. It does stand up. I've used it in salads. I've had it in so many different ways. And then you introduce your Miri Maraschino cherries, which are the first sort of clean cherries because they're all natural. They don't use the red dye number 40. There's no preservatives. And then you introduce Bada Bing cherries. So you have to tell us the story of the Bada Bings.
Well, the idea of the cherry itself was the fact that 90% of all the sweet cherries in the United States are grown in Oregon and Washington. Michigan is well known for sour cherries, but the Northwest is primarily the home of the cherry. And the maraschino cherry itself is a little bit of a misunderstood product. And traditional maraschino cherries, which are basically bleached and to which added all kinds of food dyes and food coloring, I was on a mission to find a cherry producer who could make a product for me that would have a clean nutritional label. Because our vegetables had a clean label, I want to make sure that anything I added to it would have a clean label as well. And the rationale behind doing the cherries to begin with was because I saw more people coming into the pickled vegetable business, and I realized that the opportunity with our company was much greater if we repositioned the brand as kind of a bar garnish, and we want to go beyond just pickled vegetables. So we found a packer in Oregon who was able to make a clean product with no bleach, no chemicals, no artificial colors or flavors, a pitted stem-on cherry. We called it the Miri Maraschino. It was a very happy cherry because it had not been abused by any kind of artificial colors, flavors, or preservatives. And it was an instant hit. There was definitely a market for it. It wasn't a big market, but it was definitely a market for it. And we were probably the first ones to really commercially get out a clean cherry into the marketplace. Whole Foods embraced the idea, and we are today in most of the Whole Food divisions around the country. 2 years later, the company comes up to me, the packer says, "You've done such a good job with the cherry. We have another cherry for you, and it's a Bordeaux Bing cherry." And I said, "Bordeaux Bing, does that mean that it has wine in it?" No wine, it's just referring to the color. It's a dark color. It's a dark sweet cherry as opposed to a young sweet cherry. I tried the cherry. It was fantastic, fruit forward, great flavor profile. But I said, I need to think about a name. And that evening at the Fancy Food Show in 2009, in my hotel room in San Francisco, I'm watching Tony Soprano at his Bada Bing strip club. And I realized Bada Bing Cherry was a name that would be kind of a fun name. Went on the USPTO.gov website, discovered that no one had trademarked it. So we actually trademarked the name Bada Bing Cherries. And that product has become probably the fastest growing item we have. It's probably become the #1 seller overall. and we've managed to get the products into both retail and food service, and that has been a fantastic item for us. And if it's a novelty name, superior quality will help sell it over and over again. So we've established a little bit of a reputation because of that one item.
I think that's fantastic and absolutely brilliant. Tim, you have such a keen sense of marketing, and you've demonstrated that in ways in which you've actually evolved even your labeling on the Tillen Farms. You have a glass jar. Could you tell us a little bit about that and those sort of evolutions in just packaging and how to make sure your positioning and what you stand for really has come out?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ann. And I had used a traditional label for many years, a label that I kind of inherited from the Hogue Cellars Winery, a very short vertical label that was very consistent with what my predecessors had used. And it was frankly, it was an odd moment in 2016. My 29-year-old daughter, who was definitely a target audience for our company, made kind of an impromptu statement, and she said, "Dad, your products are very cool, but your label's so tired." And that comment kind of hit me in the gut, and I realized that if I want to appeal to another generation of consumers, I really needed to go ahead and identify with what that consumer was looking for. And I wound up working with a wonderful design group out of Boulder, Colorado. I'll give them a shout out, Interact on Shelf, fantastic design group. A bunch of 20-something young group of designers who had a really keen sense of aesthetics and a really good understanding of the health food market. And they asked me to pick up a jar and said, "Hey, Tim, show us how you read a label." And I showed them how I read a label. I looked at the front and I turned to the back. They said, "Why do you turn to the back?" And I said, "Well, I'm interested in calories. I'm interested in sodium. I'm interested in the kind of things that my generation." They said, "Well, we may be interested in that as well, but we have the attention span of a gnat, and if that information is not on the front of the label, you've already lost us." So they began to make me realize that I had to rethink the whole label concept. And then when they found out that these products were hand-packed and hand-trimmed, immediately we went to a see-through label. And the see-through label we went through, I thought was a brilliant piece of design work because they basically carried a horizontal look, a banding across all of our products, both the lid as well as the jar. And we use a technique, a printing technique called rotogravure, so the product looks like it's even raised on top of the jar. It looks like the jar's been printed. And the nice thing is that from 200 feet away, you can see our label now. So it's very instantly recognizable. And the sales of our products in 2017 jumped dramatically as a result of, I think, primarily the label change by itself, because the product was just that much more attractive. So for those burgeoning young entrepreneurs who don't think that labels matter, they matter plenty, and that is primarily your communications tool with most of the people out there.
And I think that's such an important point because, especially with companies who are starting out, really your packaging is your marketing. It's supposed to tell your story. And
Absolutely.
if it's not communicating, and as you say, you have about 6 seconds to see it on the shelf, it's got to really, really work hard and stand out and really be clear, single-mindedly clear.
6 seconds. 6 seconds would be generous, Ann. It's probably 6
Yeah,
tenths of a
I know.
second.
It's like 3 seconds. Oh, well, I walk a little slower now. You're distributed in very multi-channels. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges having your products in? You were talking about bars, and you were also talking about supermarkets. And, what are the challenges that presents in terms of really staying on top of how well the business is doing?
Well, when you're an entrepreneur, you're definitely in the weeds, and you definitely have to be mindful of the fact that you really create your own importance in this business. So you've got to be at the shows. You've got to be involved with the retail customers. We have used pretty much a DSD, it's a direct store delivery method of distribution until recently, and primarily working with specialty food distributors, identifying the key accounts, making sure that you stand front and center, making sure your products are being promoted on a regular basis through multiple channels. Now, when I began to realize that the food service channel in the United States today consumes about 52% of our income that is devoted to food, that people spend more money away from home than they do at home, I made a big push into the food service channel through bars, restaurants, working with select distributors who cater to that channel. And of course, I'm heavily involved in the National Restaurant Association shows and these kind of events which cater to that trade. And today, everyone's looking for that signature presentation piece. And because we're such a small company, even creating a little bit of a interest from a chain or from a group of hotels or whatnot can have tremendous impact. This is having a really strong little niche is a wonderful business to be in. You don't have to be broad in this industry. You can be very narrow and very tight. But if you capture the imagination of a food and beverage manager or a catering manager or someone that could help create a special presentation, the volume could be enormous. And so we are sensitive to the channels that are out there today, and it goes well beyond supermarkets, grocery stores. Obviously, the health channels, the Whole Foods of the world are terribly important. But I think that there are lots of other areas where people can grow, and where if you can grow without necessarily competing with everyone else on the shelf, it's a wonderful avenue to pursue. I'll give you a good example. There are several major liquor retailers, Total Wine Spirits on the East Coast and West Coast, and beverages more on the West Coast, ABC Wines in Florida, Binny's in Chicago. These are maybe 300 or 400 altogether, these wine and liquor shops. They may account for an average of 10 times the sales per store of a conventional supermarket. Why? Because people go in there to shop. They want to buy. They don't want to be shopping everywhere else. They want to get what they want for their party or their activity and then move on. So if you have products in those channels and cater to that channel of trade, you're no longer competing with 20,000 other SKUs for consideration. You're competing with a couple of hundred. So the odds of success just by being there triple, quadruple. So you want to be there where people can buy your product.
Yeah. Tim, you have such incredible knowledge about working with distributors. In fact, you teach about it, you speak about it. What would you advise our audience who may be thinking about entering, the food category with a product line about working with distributors? What are some of the important sort of lessons learned there?
Well, distributors obviously becomes a necessary part of the equation, because a lot of the retailers today do not want more and more people for security reasons, for a number of reasons. They want fewer and fewer people coming into their stores handling product. They want to have a one-stop shop approach, which is typically why a lot of these distributors today are working on a cost-plus arrangement with some of their bigger customers. Obviously, working with a distributor, you have to make sure that you go in fully knowledgeable about what the distributor's requirements are going to be. Some of those requirements may or may not be feasible, and I think that people have to go in there with fully aware of what their own capabilities are and what they can and cannot do. I think what happens is that people make promises and assume that the future will take care of itself. Well, you have to very much take care of yourself in this industry, because today distributors will be happy to work with you if you can bring them some business and bring them some customers. So we have always historically suggested that you become your own distributor initially, work directly with the retailers you work with, and if you all of a sudden have a core group of 8 or 10 or 15 retailers in a marketplace, you may approach a local distributor to begin to take on those accounts for you. You just want to make sure you have enough margin built into the product, into your promotion, so that you can discount the product accordingly with the distributor and not see necessarily a change in the pricing on the shelf. That's always the challenge. I guess that's an ongoing challenge, and I think that today people have adopted more and more of a hybrid distribution strategy whereby they work with a retailer and let the retailer tell them how they want to buy the product. Retailers may want to go direct, they may want to go through a distributor, they may want to go through a wholesaler. There are a lot of ways how people can get product into the marketplace. You have to just be careful and just be aware of what the requirements are of the people with whom you're working. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Great advice. You were recently acquired by Stonewall Kitchen through Center Partners. I realize it's a little early days, but what are the elements of a successful acquisition and relationship after the buy?
Well, it's a good question, and obviously the ink's hardly dry in the contract. We actually announced the sale of the company to Stonewall on December 15th, and the deal actually closed just earlier this past month on January 12th. I had been thinking about kind of next steps for myself last summer, had spoke with a number of companies, but was not really comfortable with some of the folks I'd been speaking to in terms of feeling that the synergies were there. But when Stonewall Kitchen came calling, and this is a company that's one of the premier specialty food producers in the United States, extremely well known, with a long history of success in working both directly with retailers as well as through distributors. When they came calling, I really had to listen, and they made a very compelling argument and offered a wonderful opportunity to join a world-class organization. I was actually thrilled, and thinking about it in hindsight, it really was a perfect solution for Tillen Farms. Our products have a similar profile in terms of being best in class. Interestingly enough, they make about 350 different items in about 20 different categories, and yet we had zero overlap. So strategically, we actually were a great fit for Stonewall, and while we were very, very small relative to their total size, we fit in some nooks and crannies that they had been interested in pursuing. So the cross-merchandising opportunities that we have with Stonewall are tremendous, and I think that they were a wonderful company to work with. They also, they put me through the ringer, candidly, in terms of the due diligence they did, because their parent company, Senate Partners, had never done a freestanding acquisition within one of their portfolio brands. So they treated me like a fairly large company, although they maintained that they did a short list. But I will tell you that the due diligence they did was serious, was incredibly professional, and they clearly want to build a platform of with other specialty food brands for their company as well, because they have a unique distribution model whereby in many instances they work directly. They have thousands of direct buying retailers across the country. So they can actually afford to, and they wind up introducing 20 to 25 new items every 6 months. In fact, one of the things that we joke about with them is the fact that we would barely be able to get one new item a year or every 2 years. And in the next 4 months at the upcoming Summer Fancy Food Show, we'll have another 4 or 5 Tillen products in the pipeline ready to go. So when you have an infrastructure and when you have a lot of in-house capabilities as they do, they can move very, very quickly. And they're keen on what we have, what we mean, and what we can add value to their presentation. So it's really an exciting relationship. Again, having just been there for technically a month, my primary goal is to make sure that the transition is done smoothly and seamlessly. My colleague Patricia joined me as well, so there are 2 of us who have joined them, and couldn't be happier with the initial presentation, and I'm delighted with the opportunity that they've given us.
That's fantastic. So, Tim, what lies ahead for you?
Well, we have of course a commitment. Both Patricia and I are committed to working with Stonewall for a year, and my hope is that if they like the work that we do and they like the value we bring, that relationship may well continue. After that, we'll take a look and sit down and see how we want to move forward. My sense is that for me, there may be an opportunity for me perhaps to do some more work, because I do know an awful lot of people in this industry, and may well be able to help identify other potential acquisition targets. Having gone through the exercise myself, it may be a good resource for them to continue the relationship with. But that's ultimately that'll be something that we'll discuss later on this year. In the meanwhile, it's a slightly different change of pace, because they have they have a tremendous infrastructure. They have the sales management team in place. So I'm working with the regional managers. I'm working with the national director of sales and executive vice president. Actually, Natalie King, who is a friend and former fellow board member for the Specialty Food Association, is someone I knew quite well, so I was able to get some information and able to kind of bounce some ideas off of her over the last few years. But I have to say also that the other reason why I decided that this company was the right company for us was simply because the people there are extraordinarily professional, extraordinarily friendly, and enthusiastic. And when you join a great group of people, good things happen. So I'm excited about the future. I'm not worried about the steps afterwards. Whatever happens will take care of itself. Obviously, they've given me some financial flexibility to be able to pursue lots of other things if I want to. But I love the industry. I love giving back. I love staying involved with the the basics course that we teach a couple of times a year. So it's a wonderful industry to be part of, and I hope to continue.
So I hope you don't mind the personal question, but if you were in front of your grandfather and your dad right now, what would you say to them, given all the experiences that you've had and certainly where they came from with Danone and what you've done in your life? What would that be, Tim?
Well, I might ask them, should I wait a little longer to sell? But, I started this business when I was 50, and I turned a very youthful 65 this past year. And all of a sudden, the government begins to make you feel like you have, one foot in the grave and while have a great health, a great relationship at home, and a wonderful life. The travel when you're a true entrepreneur and you're putting on 100,000 miles a year and going to 15 or 20 shows a year, it does take a wear and tear out of you. And I won't say that this is necessarily a young person's business, but I do think that there's a point where you have to be realistic about your willingness to continue to kind of, be on the road. I mean, it seems like I have a whole separate group of friends in the specialty food industry who I know as well as my friends outside the industry, because I spend almost as much time with those people at various events over the course of a year. And, you really do develop very unique relationships in this industry. But I think that my father and grandfather would have been very proud of what we've done. They probably would have said, stay independent as long as you can. But I'm very happy with the choices that we've made, and I couldn't be more thrilled with the organization that I've joined. I think Stonewall Kitchen is a world-class group, and they've made they've made it feel very comfortable for both myself and Patricia. So no worries there. And I think they also have the ability to grow the brand much faster than we could have ourselves. So happy to be part of that.
That's awesome. As you were talking, I don't think people realize that basically you built this business just with yourself and one other person. So it must feel very different having a few more resources to help you actually even continue to build the brand. So I think it's really fantastic. Go ahead.
Well, it is interesting to note that this is a kind of industry, though, that with enough technology around you and with the ability to outsource, whether it's co-packing or social media, with a few good pieces of software like Outlook and QuickBooks for accounting and whatnot, you can do an awful lot with very, very few people. And obviously, if you are determined and if you can take rejection with a smile, because this is a business that involves a lot of rejection, and if you can take that with a smile and just move forward and not let that personally bother you, this is a fantastic industry. This is an industry that doesn't really care about what you look like or who you are or how old you are or what religion you're at. I mean, this is a real equal opportunity industry that is a wonderful, wonderful space. And, we've all been in this industry for a number of years, and it's exceptionally exciting. I mean, every time we do a fancy food show or we do a basics presentation, we see a couple of hundred new people come into the industry. It's a fantastic industry for a young person or for someone who wants to kind of work on their own. And certainly experience counts up to a point, but I think the rules are being rewritten as we speak as well.
Wonderful. Tim, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today and telling your story and all that awesome advice. I'm going to turn it back to Don so we can make sure that your website gets communicated to the audience.
My pleasure, Ann. Thanks for having me. The website is www.stonewallkitchen.com. That's STONEWALL, kitchen with no S.com.
Thank you so much, Tim, for being with us.
Food and Wine Insider.